The Salonika Front of World War I was a result of the Entente powers attempting to aid Serbia in autumn of 1915 against the combined attack of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Bulgaria. The expedition would come too late with insufficient forces to prevent the fall of Serbia, and was complicated by the internal political crisis in Greece known as the National Schism. Eventually, the front would be stabilized and established, running from the Albanian Adriatic coast to the Struma River, pitting a multinational allied force against the Bulgarian army, which at various times would be bolstered with smaller units from other Central Powers countries. The Salonika Front would remain stable despite local actions until the Allied offensive in September of 1918, which eventually resulted in Bulgaria capitulating and the liberation of Serbia. Now, the Salonika Front was established by the 1915 Entente landings in neutral Greece and occupation of the country. You see, Greece was neutral because their pro-German king Constantine favored neutrality, which clashed with Greek Prime Minister Venizelos' desire to join the Entente. The Entente presence and demands on the Greek government would lead to conflict with royalist forces and the seizure of strategic positions all throughout the country as the Entente forces went to fight against the Bulgarians. Eventually, the combination of the blockade, occupation of Greek territory, and pressure from French officials would lead to King Constantine's forced abdication of June of 1917, and he was succeeded by his son Alexander, who would then declare war on the Central Powers formally. However, all of this would now beg the question, what if the Entente did not invade Greece and start the Salonika Front on World War I? But first, the Salonika Front would last approximately 3 years and cost over 300,000 casualties on both sides. The front would witness 550,000 Bulgarian soldiers, 18,000 German soldiers, as well as an unknown number of Austro-Hungarian soldiers, with approximately 30,000 Ottoman soldiers fighting on the front against the Entente, which had about 717,000 men. Additionally, there were several thousand artillery pieces and machine guns on both sides, which were poured into the front. Now, without the Salonika Front, all of these troops would be deployed elsewhere. Among these forces redeployed would be the Bulgarian troops, who performed way above their pay grades during World War I and would constantly inflict lopsided victories against the Entente. In the three battles of Doiran from 1916 to 1918, the Bulgarians would inflict somewhere between 3 to 6 times the amount of casualties on the Entente forces in each battle. Bulgarian troops will be transferred more so towards the Romanian front, leading to an earlier capitulation in Romania, most likely in late 1916 or early 1917. This will additionally allow for more Bulgarian troops to be sent to the Eastern Front, which will have its own implications against the Russian Empire. The German 11th Army of 18,000 men can also be transferred towards the Italian front, and this will have a much bigger impact in the greater look at the war when it comes to battles like Caporetto. As for the Austro-Hungarian troops, the Empire can now send more guys towards the Eastern Front as well as to the Italian front. The Austro-Hungarians may also destroy the Serbian army in Macedonia, however that's kind of up in the air as the Austro-Hungarians were led by a lot of mentally incompetent leaders such as Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf. The Eastern Front in this alternate timeline would witness Russia signing an earlier armistice with the Central Powers. In the grand scheme of things, it's hard to say when this would happen and how much different it would be, but one thing is for sure is that there will be hundreds of thousands of more troops who would be then turning towards the Western Front than compared to our timeline at an earlier period in time. Without the invasion of Greece, this alternate Allied Army of the Orient, which included the French Army of the Orient, the British Salonika Army, 35th Italian Division, as well as the Italian 16th Corps, would all be redeployed, either to the Middle Eastern theater or to the Italian campaign. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Serbian armies are left stranded on their own and would likely capitulate. Additionally, the Greek National Defense Army will not be engaged in the war. In my opinion, the Italian forces as well as the French Army of the Orient would be deployed on the Italian front to fight against the Austro-Hungarians. However, the British Salonika Army would not be. And in this alternate timeline, this means one thing for Italian Chief of Staff Luigi Cadorna, and that is more forces to send in the battles of the Isonzo River, of which he launched 12, and they were pretty disastrous. The Italian front would continue to be disastrous for the Entente until, of course, Cadorna would be relieved. However, by that time, compared to our timeline, this alternate timeline would see hundreds of thousands of more casualties, because again, Cadorna has access to more troops, which means more body bags. In the Middle Eastern theater, this is where things will somewhat go more the Entente's way, as the British Salonika army would instead be going towards the Middle East against the Ottoman Empire. And I personally feel like the Ottoman Empire would fall a lot sooner with all the British troops who would now be there. The Ottoman armies would fall a lot sooner with the greater British numbers. However, there's always the chance that the British could be more overconfident. But overall, I think Britain would defeat the Ottomans in late 1917 overall, which would then have larger impacts towards the Central Powers when it comes to what they're going to do with all their guys coming off the Eastern Front. And here is where I think things will start to get more interesting. The Germans will of course be sending most of their forces from the Eastern Front to the Western Front for a potential German winter offensive in February of 1918. Here the Central Powers would be far more successful against the Entente compared to our timeline, since the American Expeditionary Force isn't nearly as strong to fight off the Germans, even though it's only a few months sooner. Although the German land grab is pretty successful in this alternate timeline, their main issue now has become to hold it while making demands against the Entente, which would most likely be denied as the Ottomans are surrendering, and a new major front opens up against the Central Powers in the Caucasus, as well as the British are witnessed moving into modern-day Turkey to challenge Bulgarian forces in the southeastern Balkans. Additionally, France will be pretty stubborn. The main factor in determining how the rest of the Great War will go is, of course, the United States. You see, at this point, France is barely holding on as the Germans maintain control over eastern France and is able to start bombing Paris. Fresh American troops are being sent into the trenches to battle against the Germans. In my opinion, this alternate Western Front would start witnessing the AEF begin to push back the Germans in late 1918 and into an eventual armistice in 1919. However, Eastern Europe is an absolute mess, and with an alternate unknown armistice with different peace terms, a lot of events in the immediate aftermath of World War I, such as the Russian Civil War, the future of Bolshevism, as well as any conditions which led into fascism in Italy, are pretty up in the air at this point. Furthermore, Germany's punishment is another indeterminate factor since the war had lasted a lot longer. However, Germany had also performed a lot better in the war. One thing I am pretty sure of, though, is that Bulgaria will probably not be punished as much and won't be giving up as much land, as Bulgarian troops didn't really fight much against the main Entente powers other than Russia, which is a crap hole and is pretty chaotic at this point, so Russia isn't going to get a say in the punishment. This is of course just one possible scenario about if the Entente never invaded Greece during the First World War. What do you think would have happened? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.